Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Ashrafil Anbiya'i wal Mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. Fa'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We concluded last week's lesson by looking at the final part of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's Mi'raj, and I mentioned that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went to the seven heavens and he received the obligation of 50 prayers and 50 salahs, which was later reduced to 5 prayers and 5 salahs. Now, after this meeting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then descended down the seven heavens to Masjidul Aqsa. He, i.e. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then got onto the Buraq, and the Buraq then took Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam from Masjidul Aqsa back to Mecca before Fajr of that day. Now, the next morning, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then called the Sahabas, the companions, and also the pagans of Mecca, and he narrated to them the incident of Mi'raj, that in the previous night Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went from Mecca to Masjid al-Aqsa. From Masjid al-Aqsa, he then went to the seven heavens. He met Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He received the obligation of Salah, and then he descended down, and from Masjid al-Aqsa returned back to Mecca. Now the Sahabas, the companions, they believed in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam straight away, but the pagans of Mecca, the mushrikeens of Mecca, they rejected, they denied this story and this incident, and they started mocking and ridiculing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They started saying, how can it be possible in one night to go from Mecca to Masjid al-Aqsa, then Masjid al-Aqsa to go to the seven heavens? It's impossible. To travel all the number of miles and kilometers, it's impossible. So they were kind of ridiculing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Nauzubillah, calling him a liar for making up these stories, calling him a fabricator, and were making derogatory remarks and comments about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now there were some people from the Quraysh who many years ago visited Masjid al-Aqsa. So they approached, or they came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they said that, okay, you said that you've been to Masjid al-Aqsa, and from Masjid al-Aqsa you then went to the seven heavens. They then started asking Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam some specific questions about Masjid al-Aqsa. Now the question they were asking, they weren't asking where is Masjid al-Aqsa, what did you see near Masjid al-Aqsa. They were asking questions such as how many doors there are in Masjid al-Aqsa, how many windows there are in Masjid al-Aqsa. Now just say, for example, if I went to your house for dinner, for lunch, and afterwards if you were to ask me how many doors in my house, how many windows did you see, it's something which you're not going to focus on. When you go to visit someone, when you go to a house, you don't actually count how many doors there are. Similarly, if somebody was to ask me how many doors in my house, top of my head I won't know. Probably have to think about it in my head, and then I'll probably give an answer. It's 10, it's 15, it's 20. But top of my head, I won't know what the answer is. Similarly, somebody was to ask me how many windows in my house, I'm not sure. It's only when I probably count it and then go over it in my head, then I probably will be able to give you an answer. Now the question they were asking Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they were asking how many doors are in Masjid al-Aqsa, how many windows are there in Masjid al-Aqsa. These questions is something which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it is obvious he didn't pay any attention to when he was in Masjid al-Aqsa. Now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was now in a difficult position because they were asking him these questions. Now if Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, oh well, I don't know how many doors there are in Masjid al-Aqsa or how many windows, then Nauzubillah, they will start then saying, oh, you're lying, you didn't go to Masjid al-Aqsa. So as mentioned in the books of Seerah, what happened was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He brought a shakal or a surah of Masjid al-Aqsa in front of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's eyes. So it was like, you could say, a screen or a picture of Masjid al-Aqsa was brought in front of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the questions they asked, how many doors there are, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was able to then look at Masjid al-Aqsa, count the doors, and then give the answer. When they asked him how many windows are there in Masjid al-Aqsa, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was able to count the windows because of the surah and the shakl he had of it, and he was able to answer the pagans and the mushrikeens of Makkah. Now, after answering all these, the Quraysh, they weren't still happy. They weren't convinced that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went to Masjid al-Aqsa and thereafter went to the seven heavens. So therefore Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to the Quraysh, said to the pagans of Makkah, that when I was returning from Masjid al-Aqsa back to Makkah, I saw a group of people. They had just left Syria and they would be arriving in Makkah in 3 days. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then narrates that when I was flying over them, I saw that one of the members of the group, he lost his camel, either the camel ran away, but then afterwards he managed to retrieve this camel. Now 3 days later, that group or that caravan which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw on the way back from Masjid al-Aqsa to Makkah, who was just leaving Syria, they arrived in Makkah. And then the Quraysh, the pagans of Makkah, they then asked them that, where have you come from? So they said, we just left Syria. Then they asked them that, is it true that when you were coming to Makkah, you lost one of your camels, but then you managed to later retrieve it? So they replied by saying yes. Now, instead of at this time believing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and concurring with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they just turned around and said, no, this is another form of magic Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has done on us, another form of sihr and jadoo which he has done on us, another form of lie and kidh, and they did not believe in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the story of Mi'raj. Now, the story of Mi'raj is a very, very famous story in Islam. Many books have been written regarding this particular story. Various commentaries have been done regarding this particular incident, and also many commentaries by the muhaddithin and the scholars of hadith have been given regarding this particular incident. Now, what I'm going to do is just mention a few points regarding this journey of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Mi'raj in the meeting of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also some other points, finer points regarding this entire incident. Now, the first point which I want to mention, and a question arises here, is that during this journey Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam met 8 prophets. If we include in the second heaven where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam met Isa alayhi salam and Yahya alayhi salam, so in total Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam met 8 prophets. Now, a question arises that why did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam meet those 8 prophets in particular? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent many prophets to this world and to this dunya. Sulaiman alayhi salam, Dawood alayhi salam, Yunus alayhi salam, Nuh alayhi salam, but Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not meet them. So the question here is that why did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam meet those prophets specifically and in particular, and what was the wisdom behind that? Now, the ulamas and the scholars have written that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam meeting these prophets was a sign, was a symbol that the difficulties these prophets went through, the difficulties these messengers went through, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would also face and suffer the same difficulties and the same hardships these messengers and prophets went through. And also another reason in particular we're going to look at with regards to Idris alayhi salam, that some of these prophets had certain traits and certain qualities. So this was a symbol and a sign that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam meeting them that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was going to use some of their qualities and traits in his life. And a comparison can be drawn with two things. One is what the mu'abbirin are those who interpret dreams. And they also say the same as well, that if you were to see a prophet in your dream, so Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, Ismail alayhi salam, Nuh alayhi salam, then it is a sign and a symbol that the difficulty or the struggle that prophet went through, you will also face the same difficulty, you will also face the same struggle. And another comparison which you could make with our dhikr as well is that when we do dhikr on the first latifa, then as we said that you should get the traits of Sayyiduna Adam alayhi salam. When you do dhikr on the second latifa, you should get the traits of Sayyiduna Nuh alayhi salam, Ibrahim alayhi salam, and so on. So exactly here as well, a similar comparison can be made, that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam met these prophets and anbiyas and messengers in Mi'raj, it was a sign that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would go through these difficulties or struggle, or like certain qualities or traits of these prophets Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would have and would find in his own life in this world. So just say, for example, in the first heaven, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam met Sayyiduna Adam alayhi salam. Now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam meeting Sayyiduna Adam alayhi salam was a sign and a symbol of hijrah and migration from Makkah to Medina Munawwara. Because when we look at the universe, the first person ever to migrate was Sayyiduna Adam alayhi salam. He migrated from Jannah to this world. And why did he migrate to this world? He migrated because of his enemy, i.e. Iblis, Shaitan. So similarly, the exact same thing happened with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he had to migrate from Makkah to Medina because of his enemies, i.e. Abu Jahal, Abu Lahab and the Quraysh. In the second heaven, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam met Sayyiduna Isa alayhi salam and Sayyiduna Yahya alayhi salam. And just one point here, you may be thinking that on the other asmans and heavens there was just only one prophet, but why on the second prophet, second heaven, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam met Isa alayhi salam and Yahya alayhi salam? Now the answer to that is very simple, and that is Yahya alayhi salam and Isa alayhi salam, they are both maternal cousins, i.e. Isa alayhi salam's mother Maryam and Hazrat Yahya alayhi salam's mother, whose name was Yashbi, and in the Bible she's known as Elizabeth, they were actually sisters. Hazrat Zakaria alayhi salam's wife, Yashbi, Elizabeth in the Bible, she was the sister of Hazrat Maryam radhiyallahu anha. So Hazrat Isa alayhi salam and Yahya alayhi salam, they were maternal cousins. They were like cousin brothers, you call them. So because of that reason, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam met both of them together in the second heaven. And what did Isa alayhi salam and Yahya alayhi salam go through, which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would face in this world and this dunya? Sayyiduna Yahya alayhi salam and Sayyiduna Isa alayhi salam, they were persecuted and harassed by the Jews and the Banu Israel. It's mentioned Yahya alayhi salam, he was martyred by the Jews. And Isa alayhi salam, as you know, the Jews think that they crucified Isa alayhi salam, but he was raised to the heavens. So by meeting Isa alayhi salam and Yahya alayhi salam is a sign that in this dunya or in this world, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would also be harmed by the Jews as well. And there are many ahadith and many Quranic verses which talks about the Jews and the Banu Israel of Medina Munawwara harming Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and giving Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam various difficulties and various tribulations. Now in the third heaven, moving along, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam met Sayyiduna Yusuf alayhi salam. Now Yusuf alayhi salam, everybody knows the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. He firstly suffered at the hands of his brothers, but then later on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made Yusuf alayhi salam prevail over his brothers. Yusuf alayhi salam brothers, they didn't like Yusuf alayhi salam. Why? Because their father Yaqub alayhi salam loved Yusuf alayhi salam more than them. So So what they did, they threw Yusuf alayhi salam into the well. Then when you look at it, the brothers, they were the cause, not a direct cause, but an indirect cause for then Yusuf alayhi salam to be sold as a slave to Egypt. And then there was the incident where he had to go to prison. So even though they weren't a direct cause for him to go to prison, but you can say indirectly in the chain, they also contributed to to Yusuf alayhi salam to go to prison. But eventually, as all of you know the story, when there were no food and the brothers had to come and ask Yusuf alayhi salam for food, and when Yusuf alayhi salam was made the minister of Egypt, and then the last part of the Surah Yusuf, where it says that all the brothers then fell in prostration to Yusuf alayhi salam. So Yusuf alayhi salam, firstly, he suffered at the hands of his brothers, but eventually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him victory over his brothers. And the same also happened with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam firstly suffered at the hands of his brothers, i.e. his tribes. The Banu Hashim, the Banu Abdul Muttalib, they didn't want to listen to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We talked about the social boycott where they stopped any food being delivered to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahabas. But eventually Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam prevailed over them, and as you know, after the conquest of Makkah, when Islam then spread to Makkah, then Makkah then became an Islamic state. So that's an example of Yusuf alayhi salam and the effect it had on Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In the fourth heaven, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam met Idris alayhi salam. Now Idris alayhi salam, I mentioned this before, he was the first prophet who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught how to stitch clothes. So before Idris alayhi salam, people were just wearing animal skins, but Idris alayhi salam was the very first prophet taught by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala how to stitch clothes. And he was also the very first prophet to be taught by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala how to make weapons for battles and for wars. Now another quality of Idris alayhi salam was that he again was the first prophet to be taught by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the art of letter writing, writing letters. And keeping this quality or attribute of Idris alayhi salam in mind, we then see that during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wrote many letters to various kings, the Emperor of Rome, to the Emperor of Ethiopia, we looked at before, Muaykis, the Emperor of Egypt, the Emperor of Persia. So all these people Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wrote letters to. In the fifth heaven, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam met Harun alayhi salam. Now what did Harun alayhi salam go through? As all of you know that when Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam went to collect the Torah, and Harun alayhi salam was made the Amir of the Banu Israel. The Banu Israel, and there was a person called Samiri, he did not listen to Harun alayhi salam. He did not, because Harun as well, he was also from the Banu Israel, so he did not listen to someone who was actually from them, and they started worshipping the calf. Again, everybody knows the story is mentioned in detail in the Quran, in the Hadith. So then what happened when Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam returned? He then ordered that the people who worship the calf, they should be killed because of their apostasy and because of their kufr. And the exact same thing happened during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, that when the Quraysh, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was from the Quraysh, but when they did not listen to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when they rejected Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when they defied Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so eventually what happened, they were defeated, and in the battle of Badr, as mentioned, that 70 of them were executed and were killed. In the sixth heaven, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam met Sayyiduna Musa alayhi salam. Now the meeting with Sayyiduna Musa alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the munasabat or the connection with that meeting was that Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam was ordered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to go and wage war against the people of Syria, Amalekas they are known as. Now Musa alayhi salam then told the Banu Israel that Allah is ordering us to go and wage war against them. But the Banu Israel, they refused, and they said, فَاذْهَبْ أَنْتَ وَرَبُّكَ فَقَاتِلَا إِنَّا هَاهُنَا قَائِدُونَ, which means that you and your Lord, go and wage war against them. We will stay here, we will sit here, and we will wait until you do the job, and then we'll enter Syria. Now, because of that reason, what happened was that Musa alayhi salam was unable to conquer Syria, and as a punishment, the Banu Israel, they were wandering around the valley of Tih for 40 years. It's mentioned in the Quran in Surah Ma'idah. But then eventually, and during that 40 years, by the way, Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam and his brother Harun alayhi salam passed away. But after the 40 years, there was another prophet whose name was Yusha bin Nun alayhi salam, who was the successor of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam. He then conquered Syria. Now, fast forwarding it up to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life and time, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam intended to wage war against Syria. And you probably heard of the expedition of Tabuk. Now, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went with a huge army to conquer Syria, but on the way he met Dawmatul Jundul, who was the name of the leader of Syria, and he begged for a truce. He said that, look, don't wage war against us. We will give you jizya, we will give you tax, and don't wage war against us. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam agreed. But then later on, after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, during the time of Hazrat Umar radhiyallahu anhu, i.e. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's second successor, Hazrat Umar radhiyallahu anhu then conquered Syria. The same way Yusha bin Nun, after Musa alayhi salam conquered Syria, similarly Hazrat Umar radhiyallahu anhu conquered Syria after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's death. So that was in the 6th heaven meeting of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, and in the 7th heaven the meeting of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So as I mentioned before, that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam met Ibrahim alayhi salam was reclining against the Baytul Ma'mur. And as I explained before, Baytul Ma'mur is the Kaaba for the angels who do tawaf around the Baytul Ma'mur. They worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they do tawaf, they engage in various forms of tasbih and dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala near the Baytul Ma'mur. And the reason why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw Ibrahim alayhi salam in that particular state, reclining against the Baytul Ma'mur, is because Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam built the Kaaba on earth. So therefore Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw him near the Baytul Ma'mur, reclining against the Baytul Ma'mur because of what he did in this world and in this dunya. And that's why scholars have mentioned that if somebody did see Ibrahim alayhi salam in his dream, then it is a basharat and glad tiding that that person would perform Hajj. And the same with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well. Now when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw Ibrahim alayhi salam in the 7th heaven, so it was glad tidings and basharat of Hajjatul Wada, farewell Hajj, which happened in the 10th year of Hijri, just before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's death and leaving of this world. Now, some scholars have mentioned that what we looked at thus far have been 7 what we call ma'arij, 7 ascensions, from one heaven to the second, the third, all the way up to the 7th. Now, as I mentioned in last week's lesson, that after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam met Ibrahim alayhi salam, there was an 8th ascension, and this 8th ascension was from the 7th heaven to Sidratul Muntaha. And some scholars have said that this 8th ascension is symbolic of the 8th year of Hijri. And what happened in the 8th year of Hijri? There was the conquest of Makkah. Then after Sidratul Muntaha, there was a 9th ascension from Sidratul Muntaha to that place called Sariful Aqlam, where the sounds of the pens being scratched, which were where the taqdeer is being written. So that was a 9th ascension. So that is referring to the Battle of Tabuk, which happened in the 9th year of Hijri. And then from Sariful Aqlam, there was the 10th ascension, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then went and met Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which we call in tasawwuf terms Baqa Billah, which is known in English as spiritual immortality. And this was a sign of the 10th year of Hijri, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would now leave this world to meet his Rafiq A'la, i.e. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are what the scholars and the ulamas have mentioned regarding Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passing the various heavens, and the reason and the hikmah and the wisdom behind meeting the various prophets on the way. Just another point to mention regarding this journey of Mi'raj. It's mentioned that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went to Mi'raj and was passing by the various heavens and asmans, he saw many angels. And some angels, they were worshipping in different ways. So there were some angels who were in standing position, qiyam. There were some angels who were in the position of ruku, bowing down. There were some angels who were in sujood, prostrating. And there were some angels who were in qu'ud and sitting down. And it is a blessing of this ummah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has combined the four elements of the angels' ibadat and worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in under one rakat for the Muslims. So that's why when we read one rakat, it includes the qiyam, it includes the ruku, it includes the sujood, and it includes the sitting. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the one rakat, He has combined the four things which four different types of angels were doing in the Mi'raj when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why when we look at the Quranic verse where Allah says وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا يُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِهِ, which means that whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, they are all doing tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are all praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why we see that everything which Allah has created, they are doing various types of tasbih of Allah. So if you take an example of a tree, so the tasbih of a tree is standing, qiyam. If you take a look at a lion or a cat or a dog or any animals, their tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ruku, because the way Allah has made them, bow down, so they're in the ruku position. If you take a look at an insect, so their tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sujood, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made their head bow down to the earth in submission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you look at stones and other rocks and everything, their tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is qu'ud and is sitting down. So these are the various types of tasbih which other creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do. But again, it's another blessing for this ummah, for the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that under one rakat we are doing four elements of prayer and four elements of tasbih. And that's why another point to mention, scholars have said that why we have the 5 daily prayers, this is like on the side, that why we have 5 daily prayers is because we have like what we call 5 senses. And as I mentioned before, that the 5 senses which we have, the hearing, the sight, the taste, the touch, and so on and so forth, so these actually are an instrument or a tool for us to sometimes make us heedless from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes when we listen to bad things, when we listen to someone backbiting, when we listen to music, then for that momentary second, for that minute, for that hour or so, we are ghafil and we are heedless of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we are, say, slandering someone, when we are backbiting about someone, when we are lying, we are ghafil of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we are looking at someone who we are not allowed to look at, our eyes is committing a sin, we are ghafil of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then made 5 prayers obligatory a day, so that even when we do something bad with one of our senses, then we'll be able to, when we pray the salah, when we pray that namaz, then that would be able to combat the bad things or the unlawful things which we are doing with our senses. So these are 2 or 3 things which are mentioned, or points which are mentioned regarding Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's Mi'raj to the 7 heavens. As I mentioned before, that scholars have written many books on that, which you can always look to afterwards. But as you can see, it's a very, very detailed topic. You know, so many things Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw, and there's so many wisdom and hikmah we got regarding that. Just one final point somebody mentioned before is that if you remember when I was explaining the story, and I mentioned that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's chest was cut, and then Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam and Mikael alayhi salam put iman and hikmat inside. So some may have a question here, is that iman or hikmat or wisdom, they are intangible things. So how on earth did they all of a sudden become tangible for Jibreel alayhi salam and Mikael alayhi salam to put into the hearts? Now the answer to that is, remember this usul or principle, and that is that there are certain things which are intangible in this dunya, but in the hereafter they are tangible. A good example will be of that very famous hadith that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that when the people of Jannah will enter Jannah, when the people of hell will enter hell, then death will be bought in the shakal of a ram. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will order the ram to be slaughtered and sacrificed, which will signal la maut, i.e. no death anymore. So that's an example of death which is intangible but coming in the form of a tangible thing, i.e. in the form of a ram in the hereafter. And similarly, there's many ahadith and Quranic verse where it says that certain a'mals which we do, so the a'mals, the actions which we do in this dunya, there's no effect of that, there's no kind of a tangible feeling, but in the hereafter there is. And there's many examples regarding the hereafter. There's certain things which doesn't have any hayat in this world, but in the hereafter there will be hayat. Like the example of those people who don't give zakat, so they've got wealth, but in the hereafter that wealth will turn into a snake, which will then bite them, and many examples similar to that. So exactly here as well, when it comes to the iman and the hikmah, even though in this dunya, according to this dunya, there's no basis, there's no kind of like, it's not tangible iman and wisdom. However, in the hereafter, iman and wisdom is tangible, and that was put into the heart of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May Allah give us the tawfiq to act on what has been said. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillah.